Sorry about that. Yeah, so if the resurrection isn't true, if Jesus never rose from the dead, then there's no eternal life, there's no forgiveness, there's no relationship with God. So really, is there any ultimate purpose and meaning in life? No, right? There isn't. Therefore, you have to believe there's noble law. Let's pretend that there is meaning. Let's pretend there is a Santa Claus. Let's pretend there is an Easter Bunny. Let's pretend, that Jesus is God or whatever, that there is some kind of meaning. Let's pretend life goes on after death. Even we know he doesn't. Let's pretend. That's troubling. That's troubling. And that's why nihilism doesn't work, is because you can't live without meaning and purpose. It's really, really hard if you're honest with yourself. And so the only other possibility then is existentialism, is that noble lie, to believe something that you know is not true. But really, that is weak in my mind. That is troubling, that if you're building your whole life, your whole purpose, your whole meaning, my whole life is built on something that I know is not true. But I need that in order to have, to keep going. Otherwise, I'm just going to be depressed and not be able to function. That's pretty sad. That's pretty sad. So if Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, life is not really worth living, if you're being honest. And so that's why people come up with all kinds of systems to provide that kind of meaning. But for Christianity is unique. In Buddhism, if Buddha was a real person or not, does it matter? No, it's his teachings, right? Did Buddha rise from the dead? No, doesn't matter. Now he's dead, it doesn't matter. Because he'll be a Buddhist, right? Hinduism. Do you have to believe in the Hindu gods to be a Hindu? Okay, maybe, I don't know, but does it really matter? Well, you just kind of go through the Confucianism, Islam. I guess if Allah is not real, does Islam fall apart? Maybe it does, right? But for Christianity, it's unique because it's based on a historical event that is either it happened or it didn't happen. Either Christ rose from the dead or he didn't. Whereas in these other religions, you can say, well, it doesn't really matter because it's the system, it's the thought, it's the philosophy or the ritual that matters. And there's no historical foundation, no historical basis for it. Or if there is a historical basis, it doesn't matter. But for Christianity, the resurrection is absolutely necessary. Or Christianity is the cruelest joke ever perpetrated on the human race. So in the book, he talks about not wishful thinking. And he talks about Frank Morrison wrote the book back, I think it was back in the 30s, Who Moved the Stone? Do you guys pick up on that? And he gives three proofs or three arguments for the resurrection. Did you pick up on those? What are those three arguments? Just list them first.
There's a fact of the Christian church.
Okay.
There's a fact of Christian day. Sunday is a day of worship for Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a Christian book, the New Testament.
So, Phil, what does he mean? How does the fact of the Christian church prove the resurrection or, give evidence to the validity of the resurrection?
The author refers to the book of Acts as after Jesus is away and now it's all up to the apostles, just seeing like how they go from church to church, spreading the word and seeing churches come to fruition. And I guess here they're saying in the city of Antioch is when they were first called Christians. So I think from there it started to exponentially grow.
So Jesus Christ was crucified AD 33, 34, let's say. And by AD 34, there are churches, that are meeting together. People are meeting together. Most of them are Jews, and they're worshiping Jesus as God within weeks of his death. And they're starting this organization called the church. And they're called Christians within a couple of years. They're being called little Christian means little Christ ones, because they're talking about Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God who rose from the dead. So the beginning of the Christian church is not in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century AD. It's not like 200, 300, 400 years later. It's not like if we would start America today and say, oh yeah, George Washington, he's our founding father, right? 250 years ago, there's this guy named George Washington, and we had Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and we make this story up. Yeah, but we're going to create this country called the United States, but we're going to pretend that it began 250, 275 years ago. Right, that's what people were arguing. But if you go back and look at it, there's pretty conclusive evidence that people were being called Christians. They were worshiping Jesus as God, as resurrected from the dead, within weeks of his death. How do you explain that, Ashley? If Jesus Christ didn't rise from the dead, does that make sense? Yeah, it's pretty hard to explain that. So you have to get people to think through that logically. And again, these are Jews who are monotheists, yet they're worshiping Jesus as God. That's a tough one. Where did they get that idea that Jesus is God? Why would Jews suddenly say, hey, I'm willing to be stoned to death for blasphemy or be whatever, but I believe Jesus is God. I'm going to worship him as God. And I'm going to do that every week, get together with these other people, and we're going to, I'm like, what? How did that happen? That's pretty unusual to have people who are fully dedicated Orthodox Jews in AD 34 in April, and then in May, they're Christians worshiping Jesus as God, like that. How do you explain that? Yeah, something must have happened. What about the Christian day, Sunday? Inky, how is that?
So it traces back to the year AD 32.
Okay.
And he mentions that there's a shift in the calendar because they changed the day of the worship from the Sabbath, the 7th day of the week, which is Sunday. And so there has to be some kind of a shift for the Jews and Christians to celebrate that Jesus rose again from the dead.
Yeah, again, so you have Orthodox Jews who have celebrated the Sabbath since the beginning of time, right? This is something they've been doing forever. And if they don't worship on the Sabbath and they don't keep it holy, they get excommunicated, they get kicked out. Sometimes they're even stoned to death. Right. So Jews, very, very careful to keep the Sabbath for millennia. Suddenly one day, these Orthodox Jews say, well, tell you what, let's just start gathering on Sunday instead. Forget the Sabbath. Come on. Let's worship on Sunday. This is kind of cool. Well, can you explain that, Phil? Does that make sense? What would cause Orthodox Jews to suddenly start worshiping and gathering on Sunday, the first day of the week, rather than on Saturday, the 7th day of the week?
Probably takes a resurrection to make some kind of shift like that.
Right. And the fact that Jesus rose on the first day of the week, and Christians worship on the first day of the week, and they call it the Lord's Day, and that's pretty early on, within a year or two of the resurrection, they're calling it the Lord's Day. But we have evidence of that. Yeah, that's pretty hard to get around. So the fact that Christians worship on Sunday means that something extraordinary happened, or at least the disciples believed something extraordinary happened on the first day of the week, that there was a resurrection. Actually, what about the fact that there's the Christian book, the New Testament? How is that a proof for the resurrection?
Well, there were multiple eyewitnesses and like different disciples who all wrote like the same account of what happened. So that
Mhm.
kind of testifies that it's not just one big like scheme, but there's truth to it.
Would we have a New Testament if there was no resurrection?
Mm-mm.
Why not?
Well, the New Testament is based off. Well, it's a lot of letters to like the churches, and the church would never have developed if it weren't for Jesus's resurrection.
Okay.
Mm,
Then we have eyewitness accounts of people saying that Jesus rose from the dead.
mhm.
And that's why they're writing these books, right? I suppose, they could have said, hey, we have some cool sayings of Jesus. Let's put them together. Or, Jesus was this really cool guy and did this really, incredible life. He healed some people and said some nice things. Let's write books about him. I mean, that's possible, I guess. But it seems kind of unlikely that you would have people who are eyewitnesses saying, hey, he rose from the dead. And then it's really interesting when you read the gospel accounts and they name the person, that means the author is saying, look, I talked to that person. I know who that person is. You can go talk to them and they'll verify what I'm saying. So that's why they put the name in. That's why they would say, and, Mary saw, or, Martha went to the tomb, or Mary went to the tomb, and Chloe went to the tomb. Well, just go ask them. What were they there? They were there. Ask them. Right? These two people on the road to Emmaus. You can go to ask them. Did that really happen? Talk to Thomas, right? He's doubting. Did it really happen? Did you really see Jesus? Did he really say that to you? Yeah. Then you have Luke, right? Luke actually went and researched. He interviewed everybody, made a very careful account. And again, early on, I mean, the Gospels were written in the 50s, right? Paul's letters were written in the 50s. So 20 years after the fact, these books are written. They're being spread around. They're being copied. And we're going to talk about that next week, the reliability of those documents. But I mean, evidence has shown that these documents, these eyewitness accounts are real. Right? This is not 200 years, 300 years later. Oh yeah, George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. No, it's not like that. Thomas Jefferson was there along with Ben Franklin when they saw George Washington chop down the cherry tree. Go ask him if that's true. Right. That's the kind of evidence you get in that story's being written, a couple of years after it happened. So these are not legendary. These aren't myths. These aren't, added on. And someone said, oh, it would be kind of cool if, Jesus rose from the dead. Hey, let's make that up. That'd be so wonderful if he did, No, I mean, these are people who were there and they saw, these are their eyewitness accounts of these events. And so you have to go back and really challenge people and say, look, these are eyewitness accounts. These are people who are saying this resurrection happened, right? And you have to take their eyewitness accounts at face value and evaluate them. Now, are they lying? Right? Are they mistaken? Right? Are they crazy? Right? Or did something really happen? But why would they write these books or something? If they didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead, they would not have written these books. And they would not have copied them and spread them around. So I think that's kind of interesting. Frank Morris, Who Moved the Stone, Morrison, Who Moved the Stone. 3 important things. But I think it's really good to go back and look at the fact of 2 things: is the empty tomb and the appearances. Because I think those are two historical realities that are hard to deny. So, Inky, was the tomb of Jesus empty on that Sunday morning?
It was empty because Jesus rose again. But
But how do you know? What are you basing that on?
our faith in the resurrection and the fact that, people didn't have any motive to hide the body or move it.
Well, the disciples would have had motive, I suppose. They could have said, hey, he said he was going to rise from the dead. Now he's dead. He hasn't come up. Let's sneak in there and get the body and hide it somewhere. And let's just tell everyone, hey, he rose from the dead. Look at the tomb's empty. Voila. Right? They could have done that. I mean, that's the charge. That's what people are saying. That's like the number one proof against Christianity would say, well, the disciples hid the body and lied. Which is number one. The earliest explanation is the disciples stole the body. In fact, that's exactly what the Jewish leaders said. Right? They start preaching the gospel. They start preaching Jesus rose from the dead. They say, oh, you guys just stole the body. Now, what is the significance of the fact that the Jewish leaders, their number one defense against the resurrection was the disciples stole the body? Phil, why is that so important? Why is that, I want to say, damning to their cause? The very fact that they said the disciples stole the body proves that Jesus rose from the dead, or it proves that the tomb was empty. Why is that?
Well, I think that's claiming the disciples, this was all a deliberate scheme and they've actually went through this, but it doesn't make sense, the events that happened after, like all the disciples went through numerous, I'm trying to remember if was it everyone except John that died for
Yeah, everyone with
expressing
John,
belief?
right? So we can go that way, but think about it this way. If the Jewish leaders said the disciples stole the body, they are admitting the tomb was empty. Otherwise, they said, come on, guys, the tomb's right, let's open up that, look at the body's in there, you idiots. Right? If you were the Jewish leaders and some people are running around, hey, Jesus rose from the dead. What? Shut up. We got the tomb right here. Look, there's the bones. Shut up, you idiots. The fact that they say, oh, you stole the body. In other words, the tomb was empty. Otherwise, they would have said, look at the body. There's no body. So the very first attack against Christians implies that the tomb was empty. Otherwise, they would not have said, you stole the body. They would have said, here's the body. Right? So the fact that the earliest defense against the resurrection was the disciples stole the body proves that the tomb was empty. You got to make that point. There's absolutely no historical doubt that that tomb was empty. Okay. Otherwise, this story would not have happened. Does that make sense? You guys tracking with me? Right. That is a foundational point. You have to make the point. The tomb was empty. Now you're going to say, well, yeah, they stole the body. Okay, well, let's deal with that. Or they went to the wrong tomb and we're going to deal with that. Or what's the other option? The Jewish leaders stole the body. But that doesn't make any sense. Right? Because if the Jewish leaders stole the body, first of all, why would they do that? Secondly, they would say, look, we got the body, guys. Ha ha. Joke's on you. We tricked you. You thought he rose from the dead, but we got the body. Yeah. So them stealing that. So the other option would be, well, Jesus woke up, right? He wasn't really dead. Climbed out of 70 pounds of incense and ripped open those grave clothes and pushed that stone against away from the door, overpowered a Roman soldiers who were guarding the tomb, and he walked miles and miles to Peter's house or John Mark's house and said, "Hey guys, I rose from the dead." Yeah, so those are your options, I think. So these are the four options. Disciples stole the body. The Jewish or Roman authorities moved the body. The women went to the wrong tomb. That would be, duh, you went to the wrong tomb, girls, right? Happens all the time, right? So don't case, all right? Or, Jesus didn't really die and he woke up and came out and then pretended he rose from the dead. So the first one is the disciples stole the body, and I think, Phil, you're on the right track. If the disciples stole the body, would they die for their faith? And Phil's saying, no, they wouldn't. Right? Because they know it's not true. Because they got the body in the garage, behind the Ferrari or, behind the Corvette, maybe in the trunk of the Corvette, right? It's sitting there rotting and it's stinking, but we're going to run around telling people Jesus rose from the dead. That implies that they're con men, right? That they're liars, they're cheaters, right? And then we have that whole discussion about the fact, does that really match the moral integrity that we see in them? But I think what Phil said is most important. Would they die for that? Do you think they would die for their... What do you think, Ashley? If you stole the body and you knew the body was in your garage, and then you're put on trial and they say, Ashley, we're going to kill you unless you say Jesus didn't rise from the dead. What are you going to do?
I mean, I would tell the truth if I do the truth.
Say, it's in my garage. Okay, it's in my garage. I confess, right? Yeah, you're probably not going to die because you know it's false. Now, if your buddies did it and they told you they rose from the dead, you might die because you believe your buddies, right? But if you were the ones who stole the body, so 10 of the 11 disciples were executed, right, for their belief that Jesus rose from the dead. If they stole the body or they knew that their buddy stole the body, yeah, one of them's probably going to crack. Pretty unlikely that all 10 of them would hold to their story. So I think that's important. They face torture and death for their beliefs. And then it's psychologically and ethically impossible for them to go around preaching, hey, tell the truth, guys, even though we're liars, we're con men, but hey, live a good moral life. Number two, and we talk about the Jewish or Roman authorities store the body. Yeah, like they had no motive to do it. And as soon as the disciples are running around proclaiming that Jesus rose from the dead, they just got to drag the body out of the morgue and say, look, it's Jesus. See, look at that. See the holes. See that, right? This is definitely Jesus. Guys, shut up. Get out of here. Yeah. Right. So it would have been easy for them to stop Christianity right there. And again, the disciples are preaching Jesus rose from the dead where, Inky? Initially, over in Asia Minor, up in Nazareth, up in Galilee.
Jerusalem?
Where are they proclaiming that Jesus Christ rose from the dead?
Jerusalem?
Yeah, like 10 feet from where the tomb is. Right? These people are in Jerusalem saying, hey, that tomb over there is empty. That's where we buried Jesus. It's empty. You don't believe me? Go look at it. Right? It's not like they're thousands of miles away. Yeah, well, this guy rose from the dead. We'll prove it. Well, yeah, you can go see that. Well, I'm not going to go to Jerusalem and look at this. Right? Everyone's there. It would have been so easy for everyone listening to wow, that's kind of cool. Jesus, oh, no, it's a scam. It's a scam. The body's right there. I checked it yesterday. Come here, I'll show you. Right. So they're preaching this in Jerusalem. Yeah. So it's very highly unlikely that the disciples, that the body was still there. It's almost impossible for them to be preaching the resurrection, the empty tomb in Jerusalem early on I mean, we're talking weeks, right? We're talking what Pentecost is 50 days after Easter. So we're talking what, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 50 days, 6 weeks. We're talking 6 weeks after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They're running around in Jerusalem saying he's alive and the tomb's empty. Yeah, that's pretty hard to do if the body's there. Number 3, the women and the disciples went to the wrong tomb. They were filled with grief. They were distraught. It was early in the morning. It was still dark. And, Mary went to the wrong tomb and said, oh my gosh, it's empty. Oh my gosh, Jesus rose from the dead. Let me go tell everybody. Ashley, if that was you, and you ran back and you told Inky and Phil, what do you think Inky and Phil would do?
We would probably go check too for themselves.
Yeah. And they come back, Ashley,
You're
we know
stupid.
you're overstressed. We know that you had a rough week. We know you're stressed from school, but you kind of went to the wrong
You need
tomb.
more coffee.
You need more coffee. Yeah, they would have corrected her. And if Peter and John went to the wrong tomb, I mean, Joseph of Arimathea, it's his tomb. Is that, hey guys, my tomb's over here. He's still there. He's still, I'm sorry. I really wish it was true, but right. And the Jewish leaders would have been, hey, dummies, right? Trying to pull a fast one on us. No, the guard's still standing in front. The Roman soldiers are over there. The tomb still, you guys went to the wrong tomb. So the wrong tomb theory is like the dumbest theory ever. Right? It's so dumb. In fact, I mean, this is a private burial. It's not going to a graveyard where there's hundreds or thousands of tombs, right? Gravestones, and I went to grandma's gravestone in the grave. Somebody dug her up or something, Yeah. Well, no, you were just over a row. Oh, okay, right. You're right. Right. No, there's only one tomb. Right. It's a private tomb. It's a garden. It's a piece of private property. It's not like there's 50 tombs there. There's only one tomb. So it's pretty hard to get the wrong tomb. And then Jesus merely swooned. And like you said, it's inconceivable that Jesus would have survived the torture he went through. I mean, you go back and read the gospel. I mean, he was whipped, he was beaten, and he was nearly dead before they crucified him, for goodness sakes. Right? Massive blood loss. Then he was on the cross for 6 hours, hands pierced, legs pierced, side stabbed, crown of thorns on his head. Yeah, and the fact that the water and the blood came out of his side. The Roman soldier himself, expert in death, right? This is his job. He kills people every day. He's not gonna be, I don't know, is he dead? I don't know. It looks like he's dead. No, he knows he's dead, okay? He's killed hundreds of people. He knows when someone's dead, right? So he puts him in the tomb. Let's just say for some chance there still was that little heartbeat. Phil, do you think that someone who went through all that torture would come back to life and be able to get out of the tomb? Is that feasible?
No, I mean, even let's say it was possible, like I don't think he would be in the position where he can just walk so naturally soon
Yeah.
after.
How is he going to roll that stone? And yeah, who moved the stone? Right. That's the name of another book, right? That was the name of the book of Frank Morrison's book, right? Who moved that stone? I mean, it took a bunch of guys to put the stone in place, and they put a seal on it, put Roman soldiers in front of it. And yet Jesus, tortured nearly to death, climbs out of his grave clothes, rolls up to the door and just pushes it over and walks out. Yeah, I mean, could have happened. Okay, one chance out of a million. Right. Ashley, do you think he could have walked the miles and miles and convinced the disciples that he had miraculously risen from the dead? What do you think the disciples would have thought when they saw him? Just assume he was able to get out of his grave clothes. Assume he was able to roll the stone away. Assume he was able to jump those those Roman soldiers and knock him out and trek all that long distance, knock on the door. Are they going to say, wow, Jesus rose from the dead? What are they going to say? You're the
No, I
doctor.
think they'd be like, what the heck? Like, it's not crazy.
Let's get this guy to the hospital, right?
Yeah.
Let's get an IV in him. Let's clean these wounds up. Let's, get a transfusion going. Anyone got O positive blood here, right? I mean, we're going to do some triage on this guy. I doubt that he's going to come and convince them that he is the conqueror of death. Yeah. The most they probably would have thought was, wow, what a miraculous event. He survived death, right? They're not going to say, wow, he rose from the dead. I really, really highly doubt that he would instill any kind of confidence in his disciples that he rose from the dead. Does that make sense? So if the tomb was empty and there's no explanation for it, except the fact that Jesus Christ had to have risen from the dead, right? Can you think of any other way that the tomb became empty? The Starship Enterprise came over and beamed the body out. Some aliens came, right? Now you got the aliens came in, they beamed Jesus out of the tomb, Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this would hold, but I'm just thinking people could say like, oh, maybe before they put his body into the tomb, like somehow in between they pretended to put his body into the tomb and then hid it somewhere else or something. But
They switched the bodies. Yeah,
something
but
like that.
who's putting him in the tomb though? I mean, you got the Jewish leaders there, you have the Roman centurion soldiers there. I mean, you think the disciples are going to be able to sneak in and slip a different body in there?
Yeah, and there are also a lot of witnesses, I'm sure.
Yeah, people are watching this happen. Yeah, it'd be pretty hard. It'd be pretty hard to switch the body. Now, if you ever watch, Monty Python? They did The Life of Brian. And here's what they had. When Jesus is going to be crucified, Joseph from Arimathea has to carry his cross. Remember that? Remember the point? Jesus falls down and they pull the guy, not Joseph, but who's that guy? Simon Cyrene, right? Cyrene had to come and they had him carry the cross for Jesus, and then Jesus ran off, and it was Simon who got crucified on the cross. Now, I mean, people you have all the women down there, you have John, and they say, wait a minute, that's not Jesus, right? Shh, quiet. Shh. The Jewish leaders would say, hey, wait a minute, guy looks a little different. I mean, they were all there. Yeah, so I mean, you could have said, yeah, maybe they switched the body before the crucifixion, or switched the body between, before it got to the tomb. Put a healthy guy in there instead. And in the middle of the night, he gets up and sneaks out, right? Sneaks out the back entrance. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you could come up with all kinds of weird theories, but the tomb is still empty, right? Right. The tomb is still empty, so you have to deal with that. The second one is the appearances of Christ. There were 10 distinct appearances of Christ that we have record of. 11 if you count Paul after the fact. And they're in different times and different places to different individuals and different groups made up of different people, right? Over the course of 40 days. Okay, that's important. We have historical records, we have eyewitness accounts of Jesus appearing 10 times over the period of 40 days. Okay. That, I think, is historically accurate, because Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, right, he lists those and he says, look, you can go talk to them. You don't believe me? Go check these guys out. Go and do that. Each appearance is accompanied by different acts of Jesus, different words of Jesus. So it's not like the same events being repeated 10 times, right? So it's not a holographic projection. It's not, some mind some post-hypnotic suggestion where everyone sees the same thing every time. I mean, every time Jesus does something different, says something different, does different things. So that's important, because you have this variety of experiences, a variety of people in different situations, different circumstances, different places. And so the only argument against the post-resurrection appearance of Christ is it's a hallucination. I think the historical evidence that the disciples believed that they saw Jesus. I think it's pretty hard to look at these documents and conclude that they were making it up. Again, then you have all those same problems. Oh, they were just lying. They just made it up. Right. Pretty hard to believe that, based on the fact that they died for it. So at least there's 500 people who are convinced that Jesus Christ appeared to them after the resurrection. That's a sizable number of people claiming to have seen Jesus in the flesh. And so here's the 4 points that I think the fact that hallucinations is not a problem. First of all, hallucinations generally occur. And have you studied psychology, Ashley? It's not part of your curriculum. So hallucinations generally occur in people who tend to be vividly imaginative and of a nervous makeup. Okay, so that tends to be, so if you go back and look at people who have hallucinations, they tend to have a certain type of personality. So yeah, there could be some people who were like that and they had hallucinations of Jesus, but 500 people all being of that type of personality, fitting that profile, yeah, probably not. Number 2, hallucinations usually occur only at particular times and places, and they tend to be associated with the events fancied. So in other words, there's a certain, maybe Jesus ate supper every Sunday night in that upper room, right? And you can imagine everyone's gathered there. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if Jesus were here? And oh, wow, he's back, and that would be understandable, right? Because they were used to seeing Jesus there, and now they see him again in that same place, in that same setting. But you got 2 guys walking on a road to some town. Suddenly Jesus appears. Whoa, right? Jesus is on a mountainside and sees 500 people. Wow, that's kind of unusual, right? So these hallucinations are appearing in different places that you wouldn't expect them to appear, because there's no connection between Jesus in that place in the minds of the people having the hallucination. So, which is pretty unusual to be having hallucinations disconnected from anything associated with the person that you're hallucinating about. And then having that happen in multiple places, multiple times, both indoors and outdoors. There's a lot of different variables. It's very hard to believe that you would have hallucinations occurring in all of those different situations. Number 3, hallucinations occur over a long period of time, and usually with some regularity. And so a person who's hallucinating tends to hallucinate, for years. They'll have that hallucination will come up again and again and again. These hallucinations happen only for 40 days, and then they abruptly stop. So that's kind of unusual. And then finally, hallucinations occur in people who intensely want to believe so much that they project something that isn't there. But the gospel accounts clearly show that the disciples did not believe that Jesus was going to rise from the dead. In fact, they were surprised when the Mary came back. Hey, Jesus was from the dead. They're like, nah, come, it's no way. It's not like, oh yeah, we've been waiting for this event. Wow, praise God, it happened. No, they're like, what? You're crazy. No one's rising from the dead, right? This doesn't happen. They're not expecting it. And so for a hallucination to happen, it's got to be something that you're expecting, something that you want. You're just hoping it's going to happen. But the disciples really did not have any expectation of that happening. So that's pretty hard to believe that all of these appearances were hallucinations. So how do you explain that? If it's not a hallucination, Phil, how do you explain that 500 people saw Jesus alive after his crucifixion?
That Jesus really was, like, if it's not an hallucination, then Jesus really was there up on his feet in front of all those people.
Can you think of any alternative view, Inky?
I mean, the only other thing I was thinking of, but I think it's solved or it's answered by the hallucination explanation is like, I don't know, like I know those that go through like PTSD start to have like very severe, I don't know if it's hallucinations or maybe like illusions or things that cause them trauma and maybe force them to imagine things. But I think the third bullet that you have, I feel like is a solid rebuttal to it, because
So
Yeah.
do you know any occurrences of 500 people having the same hallucination at the same time? Or 500 people having PTSD event at the same time? That's pretty unusual. Or even the upper room. You got the 11 or 10 disciples, or then the 11 with Thomas the next week, plus all the women. You know, you're probably looking at, 34, and who knows how many people were in that upper room, all having the exact same hallucination or the same PTSD event. I think that's pretty unusual. That'd be pretty, chances of that happening is pretty rare. Yeah. So the fact that people saw Jesus alive and interacted with him and talked with him and they ate with him and they touched him, right? He told, touch me, touch my side, touch my hands, right? And he ate fish with them. He had meals with them. He broke the bread. He talked with them and conversed with them. He said, look, I'm not a ghost, right? See, look I'm not a ghost, touch me, right? So it's not a ghost, it's not a hallucination, it's not something, they saw Jesus spiritually and, no, it's actually something that he was a physical and was bodily there. I also like this point here, they were persuaded against their wills. I just want to go through this quickly. The disciples did not originally believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but needed to be persuaded by hard evidence before they would believe. Right? So the women say, hey, Jesus rose from the dead. They're like, yeah, come on. Thomas, hey, we saw Jesus. Like, yeah, no way. Not believing it. I'm sorry. That's weird. You guys are crazy. Right? Show me. Right? They did not believe it. Mary's actions of going to the tomb to anoint Jesus' dead body, and the fact she didn't even recognize him initially, shows that she was not expecting him to be be alive. Right? She was expecting Jesus to be dead. Right? She wasn't like, oh, there he is. I was waiting for that, right? She did not believe he was going to rise from the dead. In fact, he had to say, hey, Mary. It's like, oh, wow, it's Jesus. She was like so shocked, right? She was not looking for that. The disciples didn't believe Mary when she told them she was seeing the Lord. The disciples were afraid and in hiding, right? So they had to be convinced by his presence, and they actually had to be convinced that he wasn't a ghost. Thomas doubted. We saw that. When Thomas met the risen Lord, what did he do? He falls down and worships him, saying, my Lord and my God. Seems like he was pretty convinced, right? A Jew is not going to, that's blasphemy. That's a capital offense. He could have been put to death for saying that. But he says, my Lord and my God. So he's totally convinced Jesus rose from the dead. To hold the hallucination theory and explain the appearance of Christ, one must completely ignore the evidence, and it's difficult to explain how the small band of frightened, cowardly disciples were changed into men of courage and conviction, especially in Jerusalem, right? So those three things, they weren't expecting it. They had to be convinced against their will that Jesus actually had risen from the dead. Jesus had to prove it to them. And then finally there's the contemporary proof. If Jesus rose from the dead, he's alive today, which means he has the ability to invade people's lives today. And he's alive. He's not dead. He is active. He is talking to people right now. Right. Like I said, my Muslim friend prayed, God, show yourself to me. And Jesus shows up. Right. That's pretty hard to explain. So Jesus is alive. He is changing people's lives today. And you can invite him into your heart and experience that for yourself. And you'll say, yeah, I know Jesus is alive. Why? Because I personally met him. And that's subjective. That's hard to explain, but it's something you cannot doubt. Just like I cannot doubt that the sun is setting right now, and it's a beautiful, glorious sunset, because why? I see it. I'm personally experiencing it. Now, you guys may not believe me. Maybe where you are, it's dark outside, or it's cloudy, and maybe it's raining. But for me, my experience is I'm seeing this beautiful sunset. And so for the individual, we talked about that in the first week, that your personal experience of Jesus Christ is indisputable, right? And I think even belief in God, we didn't talk a lot about that when we talked about the existence of God, but even the belief in God is fundamentally basic, and it's an experience that every human being has until they deny, until they push it off. So Jesus is alive. God is real. He is there. B.F. Westcott said this. I'm just going to close with this. Indeed, taking all the evidence together is not too much to say that there is no historic incident better or more variously supported than the resurrection of Christ. Nothing but the antecedent assumption that it must be false could have suggested the idea of a deficiency in the proof of it. So if you have an open mind and an open heart, and you look at the evidence, I think you'd be convinced. And you guys ever watch the movie Ben-Hur? Read the book Ben-Hur? If you get a chance, you got to watch the movie. Don't watch the new one. Go watch the 1950s version, the black and white one by I don't know if it was Cecil B. DeMille or whatever, but with Charlton Heston in it. Oh man, it is an incredible story. But the guy who wrote that, forget the guy's name. He was a lawyer, and he tried to disprove the resurrection. And he went and he dug through all the evidence, and he ended up writing the book Ben-Hur because he was convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. And so he put all of his research into that book to prove to other people, to show that Jesus did rise from the dead. Lee Strobel, C.S. Lewis, several other people. I can't talk about that. Think of name off the top of my head. But they all went and they wanted to disprove the resurrection. And every single person who went to disprove the resurrection has come back and said, it's the most historically reliable event ever. There's more evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ than the existence of Plato or Socrates or Aristotle or any other ancient figure or event. The resurrection has solid evidence, historical evidence for it. So go back and read that chapter again. I think that chapter is very, very powerful. And if you can walk through that evidence and you can understand the significance of everything that's being said, not just understand what they're saying, but why they're saying it and why that's convincing, I think you can lay out a good argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I usually preach a sermon on Easter, 21 reasons why I believe in the resurrection. Right? And there's a lot of evidence that you can just look at. This, and this. It's pretty conclusive that the tomb was empty. The tomb had to be empty. Okay. And all the other explanations really don't add up. Jesus did appear to people after his death, and he appeared alive. I mean, it's hard to deny that truth. Okay. What really happened, right? It seems like the historical documents that we have of eyewitnesses seem to be reliable, right? Seem to be reliable. So go back and read that. And I think it would be really important. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll let you guys go. I will see you guys on Sunday then. And you guys enjoy the weekend, all right? Okay. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.